Hello, everybody, and this is Just What the Doctor Ordered. This is a new show that we are launching where we're going to be discussing everything from the world of Doctor Who. I am your host, Declan, and with me is my co host, Bri.
I'm new to this, but this I'm gonna try and I think this is gonna be like me talking. I got my there. Sorry. Um, I've been watching the show for like a long time, so kind of have like not an expert opinion on it, but more like knowledge on it, I guess.
Yeah, basically, how this is set up is we have me. I am someone who is relatively new to the Doctor Who universe. I have only just started watching the series from series 11, and then Bri, you've watched everything from Eccleston forward, is that correct?
Yep,
Yeah,
from series
so
1 to 11.
Yeah, so I've wanted to get a bit more of an expert, a bit more of an aficionado on here to do this with me, just so she can kind of correct me if anything goes wrong. So in this first episode of this series, we're not quite sure how often we're going to do this. The plan is when series 12 rolls around, we'll do a episode for each respective episode of the series. But obviously, at the moment, we're not going to be getting a new series until 2020. So we're not quite sure how often we're going to do these. It might be sort of once every 2 weeks, or maybe even more than that. We'll just have to wait and see what ideas we come up with. But in this very first episode, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be discussing everything Series 11, everything about it, the characters, the episodes, what was good, what was bad, and what was ugly about it. So with all that said, let's dive into the characters first of all. So obviously a huge talking point about this first series of, well, for series 11 is the Doctor. We have a new Doctor, and a very big talking point is obviously because she is the first female Doctor. So what were your opinions on Jodie's Doctor?
I was nervous going into obviously because it's such a big change going from what Peter Capaldi going into Jodie Whittaker, especially from the reveal. Like honestly didn't see a female Doctor coming. I thought that they were gonna go for Rupert Grint honestly for the 13th Doctor, but after seeing her performances all the way through, I honestly I like her as the Doctor. I can see her going forward as being good in the character's role, but there are some things that do bother me about her. So she doesn't have. I've noticed this going back and watching older episodes as well. She doesn't have as much of an on-screen presence. I feel as like Matt Smith, David Tennant, or Peter Capaldi did. She's got the potential to have that on-screen like presence, but I don't feel like the script she's been given necessarily backs it up and gives her the breathing room to give her that development. I don't know what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think for me, I really liked Jodie Whittaker before, even before this series. Like, she was in a fantastic film called Attack the Block, which was directed by Joe Carnahan. That was also the debut of John Boyega as well from the new Star Wars films. But I really liked her from that. So when she was cast, I was like, even though I wasn't even watching Doctor Who, I wasn't really interested at the time. I just, I was obviously following the news. I was like, yeah, that's a good casting, to be fair, to get. When the series rolled around, I think she's incredibly likable. She's really charming. She is really just, and I think she is a nice presence. Not exactly an on-screen presence as if you're talking about, but what I mean is, she's a nice presence to have on screen. My only problem with Jodie's Doctor is it's not necessarily a problem with Jodie herself. It's actually more to do with the writing in the sense that she doesn't have much range. She's kind of very much the same personality in every kind of situation, which is hard to buy into. There are certain situations where she should be a bit more intense or a bit more angry, and it wasn't really until the last episode of the series where she really started to show a bit of range. And again, that's not down to Jodie's acting ability. That's down to the writers simply not putting her in any of those kind of mindsets. But other than that, I did really like her Doctor, especially by the end. I was really into what she was able to bring to the table.
I think from the Witchfinders onwards, she found herself into the role.
Yeah.
Like I think when she was like talking to I think it was I can't was it King John or one
King James.
King James, when she was talking to him, when she had she just looks back at him, and when she goes at the end of the episode, it's like, yes, that is the Doctor, and that's each Doctor has that moment. Like you realize, yes, that is the Doctor, that is the person who I've been watching for this so long, and I didn't feel like she had that moment until at least episode 8, and then from then on, I was starting to feel her as the Doctor. That's what I felt for it.
Yeah, I definitely think I remember the Witchfinders. Yeah, in particular, was being one of the episodes where I was like, yeah, that's something sparking there, something a bit more like, because she came across quite frustrated in that episode due to obviously everything going on, the fact that she is a woman, and in the Witchfinders, obviously there was a lot of witch trials and things like that, and she was obviously opposed to being a witch, which I completely expected going into that episode, just given, you know, the subject matter and her being the Doctor and having the sonic screwdriver and things like that. I was like, yeah, that's obviously going to happen. But her reaction was very very visceral, and I thought, yeah, that's what we've needed. And yeah, from that point on, I think in It Takes You Away she was good, and then in the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, she actually, like, the frustration she had with Graham, like in the beginning when Graham's like, oh, I'm gonna kill Tim Shaw. You know, I think that, again, that was the range. And especially, like, the very last scene of the last episode when she's talking to the Ux and she's saying, you know, there's a lot out there in the universe, it might surprise you. Like, that moment in particular really hit it for me. And it was like that very last scene where I was like, there we go. That's what I've been needing. So, yeah, I think she's really good. I really do. I really like her. And I think now in Series 12, it's obviously been confirmed she is coming back for Series 12. I think we're going to see a lot more from her.
Yep. I feel like, especially in Series 12 with the returning monsters, there's so much more they can do with her, as in getting different reactions out of her from the Daleks or the Cybermen. That I feel like she'll have a lot more range to go into with Series 12, especially if Chris Chibnall takes the feedback he's gotten from Series 11 and then improves on it going into Series 12. I feel like it'll be so much, like, better. No, I don't want to say better, because I did feel like her in this series was good, but it could improve. I think that's the word I'll go with.
Yeah, I think there's definitely room for improvement. And I think that's kind of a theme that is going to persist throughout this entire review and this entire series, is that it's a good start, and but there's definitely room to improve. I think a lot of the negatives for this series come down to one man, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But moving on to the companions, this was also something a bit different because we had 3 companions this year, which is a bit more than normal. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's new for the modern era, but it goes back to what the show was like in the 1960s. When it first came around, they had 3 companions, but that's never been a precedent that was set for the modern series. So yeah, that is something new for this series.
Yeah, see, that's the kind of expert knowledge I have you on here for. Let's start off with Ryan. So Ryan, I thought, was quite an interesting one. At first, I found him quite annoying and brash, but I think that was intentional.
Yeah,
Yeah, because as the series went on, he did get a lot more likable. I think, especially when you get to around episode 7 or so, he kind of really began to sink into the role and matured with the role, and I think that was very much intentional.
I got in Kablam especially, because there was that scene at the end of, well, it's close to the end of Kablam where the Doctor's like, "Where are you going?" It's like, I know my way around these places, and then like where he's talking to Yaz and the worker there and saying like, I used to do this when I worked at the places. He definitely had fit into the role by Kablam, and then going forward, he was a lot more likable. Although I did like how they set him up in The Woman Who Fell to Earth, how they gave him those moments with like Graham and Grace on the hillside, and ending the episode off with him as well. I did like that touch. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, like the scenes with him and Graham, like riding the bike and things. I think that was, you know, a quite really sort of nice, touching moment, which I think really benefited with them too, especially with Graham as well, who we'll get onto in a sec. So yeah, Ryan, to me, he was just a very interesting one who, like I say, just really did improve. I didn't like him at first, and I didn't think I was gonna like him, especially because it's in the early episodes. It's just I found him to be too brash for my liking. But again, I think it was very much intentionally written that way to show how much he grows by the end of the season, especially his relationship with Graham as well, which is like a core thing for this series.
Yeah, that was one thing I do love one of the few things I do love going through the series is the ongoing character development between Graham and Ryan, and that was one thing that Chris Chibnall said going forward throughout the series, that there wasn't necessarily going to be like an arc, that it was going to be more like character development throughout the series, and that is one thing he nailed with Graham and Ryan. I did really like their progression throughout the series, and I do agree with you on the fact that at the start of the series, like when in the Ghost Monument, when Graham's trying to getting him to open up a bit, and he just completely shuts him down almost instantly.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments like that early on where Graham does try to push him, and it doesn't quite work. But then by the end, especially when you get to like episode 9 in particular, the ending there, you get to see that arc, and I thought, it was definitely an improvement. And I really like Tosin Cole as well. I have to say, I think he's very likable.
Yes, I don't know if there's like they do these after show things like extra, and Tosin Cole is really likable and knows that, and like when he's just himself, and he's a really likable person in interviews. I do like him as an actor, and I like all of the core cast as people, honestly.
Yeah, I do as well.
Oh,
yeah.
I think that Ryan especially he was the one who grew most as a character throughout the series.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And I feel like we were supposed to see the series through his eyes. That's something that's been through throughout all of the companions. Like you see the universe of Doctor Who through the companions' eyes, and I feel like in this series we were supposed to be looking through the universe through Ryan's eyes, and we were supposed to grow with him, and that was what I felt like he was going for. Personally.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting talking point. I've never actually thought about it that way. Just because I always felt it was more of a spectator sport, but I think it is interesting to look at it in that way, especially because obviously for these characters, and I think it's a good way to talk about it as well because everything in this series was new. Like there was no returning villains or returning monsters from previous series, so in that way, I think that works in the sense that we were experiencing these new things like these characters were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was something they set as a precedent. I think from the very, it's either the first or second trailer where you just hear the Doctor saying all this is new to me, like new planets, new worlds, new people. That they made sure that we knew going into the series that this is going to be something completely new, and we shouldn't expect what we've seen before. And series was completely, well, not completely different. It was familiar, but it was different to what we've seen before.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, as obviously this was my very first series of Doctor Who, and from what I've seen of it in the past and what I kind of knew of it growing up, this felt quite different to what I knew it to be. But that's not to say that it was bad. I really enjoyed this series, but I do agree it kind of feels different. Even though I haven't seen it, it does feel a bit different. So I guess next we'll move on to Yaz, played by Mandip Gill. Yaz was the... she kind of drew the short straw, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
I felt really bad for her, actually. She had nothing to do in this series. I think Mandip Gill did a really good job in the role. I thought she was great. And I liked her character. She just got nothing to do. And what annoyed me the most about the entire situation is that she was supposedly meant to be getting like her own episode, which was supposed to be episode 6, Demons of the Punjab. But that wasn't even necessarily about her. It was about her like family and her lineage, not necessarily about her. Like she doesn't really grow from it necessarily. So yeah, Yaz just kind of remains very consistent and very much in the same place the entire series.
I can agree with that, especially Demons of the Punjab. I thought going into the episode you were gonna learn something about Yaz specifically, not her family. I get that it was set in her family's past, but I thought we were going to learn something about her as a character in that, but she was just kind of a spectator and something that was supposed to be her own episode. And she fills the role of... So again, this goes back to the classic era. The companion in the classic era always was the person who ran after the Doctor, sometimes got in trouble and most of the time asked questions so the viewer could actually find out what was going on in that situation. And from what I saw, yes, that was what she was representing throughout this entire season. She was, especially in, I think it was the Saranga conundrum, she had to ask the Doctor to explain what something was, and then that throughout that entire episode, she was literally just asking questions to try and get things out of the characters. It's, I don't know. I do feel bad for Mandip Gill. She is a good actress. She did well with what she was given. I don't think the fans helped in any way because I don't know if you paid much attention to fanbase, but there was a lot about shipping Yaz and the Doctor throughout this series.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, see, the thing is, shippers will go crazy over anything. Like, I seen like shipping for like Graham and the Doctor as well.
Oh no.
Like, can we just like not do relationships for once? Like, can we not just leave it? Like, I mean, I kind of would believe if there was a ship for Ryan and Yaz, I'd kind of understand that. And to be honest, I'm surprised they didn't go that direction. I really thought they would do by the end of this series. I mean, they still could do, for however long Ryan and Yaz are both on the show. But, could we just leave the shipping?
it's my personally for me it's always been a thing. I don't want a Doctor shipped or in a relationship with a human. It to me it doesn't seem right because the Doctor is somebody who has no concept of so Time Lords have no don't really have a concept of gender or sexuality. The Doctor isn't neither straight nor gay nor bisexual. They don't have there are human concepts.
Yeah.
So I don't see how shipping with the Doctor can really work.
Has the Doctor ever had a relationship in the past? Like, has it ever happened?
Yep, series two, David Tennant's Doctor had a relationship with Rose, Billy Piper's character, which was
Right.
heavily played out, and then there was River Song, who granted was partly the Matt Smith's Doctor's own race, so she was part Time Lord, but that was the only situation where it worked because they were of the same, they knew each other and they were kind of like the same species as well. That's the only time it worked for me, really. Otherwise, it just feels out of place. I think that the shipping and the relationship should be left down to the companions, and the Doctor should be like just somebody who wants to go out and explore the universe. I don't think the Doctor should be somebody who's tied down to a relationship necessarily. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't fit the character of the Doctor from
No.
what they tell.
No,
So
I agree with that. Like, especially because I'm obviously very kind of involved with the Arrowverse shows and the DC TV stuff, and that is just shipping galore. So, I was kind of hoping with this that I could kind of get away from that, but guess not. But yeah, Yaz, she was definitely an interesting one. I just really hope we get to see more of her next series. And she actually gets some things to do, because there were even like some little standout moments, like in Kablam. There's the moment where she you get to see like her police officer training when she like gets what's the character's name, the villain of the episode, when she like flips him over. Like that was like really cool. That was like a little tidbit. I was like, yes, there we go. That's a bit of something. And you get like little moments like that. And I think like in It Takes You Away, she had some nice moments with the blind girl in that episode as well. But other than that, there just wasn't much there.
I thought in Rosa as well, when they were going through the different things about Rosa Parks' life, that was some of her background of police training coming in, because she was listening off facts that she'd learned about Rosa, that she'd memorized from when she was just the few moments she had with her. She'd remembered that and brought that to their whole conversation about how they were gonna not follow. I think it was follow Rosa, that they were trying to obviously save her from the Krasko, I think his name was.
Yeah.
And that was what that was part of her training coming through there as well. But otherwise she was just kind of there in the background. She didn't really have much to do.
Yeah, it's a shame, but hopefully we'll get more in series 12. But the absolute goat of the series, the best part of the entire thing, is Bradley Walsh as Graham. I love Bradley Walsh anyway. He was kind of one of the main things that actually made me want to watch this series, was the fact that he was cast in this. I was like, okay, that is incredible. I'm still slightly annoyed that there were no Chase references, but I'll let that slide. But just seeing Graham, he doesn't necessarily change as much as maybe some of the other ones do, but he does have an arc, given the fact that obviously what happens to him in episode 1 in The Woman Who Fell to Earth with Grace. Grace was a huge thing for both Graham and Ryan, and seeing his arc, the way obviously she was killed by Tim Shaw. In episode 9, he gets to meet with her again, kind of, and then in episode 10, when he sees Tim Shaw again, he has to go through like this revenge thing. But Graham, he was fantastic in this.
Yeah, I loved Graham. He's by far one of my favorite companions throughout the entirety of the reboot. I think that he brought so much to the role. He brought so much to the show. I felt like he was the comedic relief in the background, like constantly making, especially with I liked in Rosa Parks where they were again in that scene where it's like where she starts writing on the wall. It's like, hang on, you can't do that. It's like you're not Banksy. She just turns around to him. that scene was great. His chemistry with the Doctor. I love how he calls her Doc.
Yeah.
Like he's so casual. He's
Yeah.
not trying to be anybody else. He's just Graham, and that's what I love about him.
Yeah.
I think what was it? Like you said in the Battle of Ransquare Carlos, I loved how he just stops the Doctor and says, "Look, if I see him again, I'm going to kill him." And then when we got onto that episode, and there's more I want to say on it, but the fact that he went through all those emotions in that one episode, and then the conclusion he ends up coming to, I really do respect him and like his character for coming to that conclusion.
Yeah, he was definitely for me my favorite for sure. I just thought he was just so much fun, and again, like the comedic relief, especially because he's slightly older than what I typically expect, and just seeing him do all these things and seeing him also get completely baffled by everything that happened, and even just like small little moments, like I think it was in episode 9 when he pulled out the sandwich that he had, that he brought with him because he was realizing that he was getting hungry every time he went out on a mission and stuff like that. Like it was just, I think Graham, like he was the most relatable. In a way, he was the most realistic, because he basically was just a guy who got thrown into these situations, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. I loved him, everything about him. I thought he was fantastic. So, with all the companions all listed and everything like that, we'll now go and dive into every episode sort of one by one and discuss the good and the bad and the ugly of each and every one. Obviously, the series is technically not fully done yet. We obviously do have the New Year special, but we will dive into that a bit later on as well. But let's start off with, obviously, the first episode, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. So, what is your overall opinion on this?
Honestly, my overall opinion of this after rewatching it has slowly degraded over time. First time I watched it, I really liked it. I thought it was a really good start to the series. I liked all of the characters. I thought the plot was decent, but honestly, and this would be a thing going throughout a lot of the episodes. After rewatching it, I don't think it's as good as I thought. I feel like there are some like different plot threads that don't make sense. I do like that one of my favorite scenes is when they're all talking about how they're going to track down Tim Shaw, and Graham just turns around to the doctor and say, "I'm gonna go contact some of my bus friends to see if they know anything. If you want to know anything in the city, you ask a bus driver." I thought that was great. I think Tim Shaw was a good start as a villain. He was threatening in this episode, and I think the other thing that was in this episode, which the Doctor thought was like the start of an alien civil war. I think it was called a gathering coil. I'm not. That was an interesting concept, and I like how when they're on the rooftop, she calls him out, and it's like Tim Shaw is a liar. I thought she had a good, not necessarily present. She had a good like start off as a doctor. I do like seeing her adjusting to like after regeneration and how she explains it. Like every cell in my body is changing, every cell in my body is burning. How she explains it, I think it is Grace and Graham.
Yeah.
And I love the whole scene where she builds the sonic screwdriver. I love the fact that she actually built the sonic screwdriver this time, because throughout the entirety of the series, the sonic screwdriver has always been something that the TARDIS literally just ejects out of the console and gives to the Doctor, but not this time. She makes it, and I really do like the design of it. It's different, and it's not really called a sonic screwdriver anymore. I love how she calls it the Sonic Swiss Army knife.
Yeah. I mean, that's very, very appropriate given all the things it can do. I do have a slight issue with the Sonic in that it's kind of just used for everything. Like, she kind of just, like, points at everything and it'll fix whatever's going on. But I still think the design of the Sonic was very cool, and definitely something, an interesting addition. In regards to Tim Shaw, like, he's kind of one of my biggest issues with the series as a whole. Not even necessarily him as a character, but more the fact that this series doesn't necessarily have an overarching story and an overarching villain. Like, Tim Shaw is technically the overarching villain, but he only shows up in this episode and the last episode. There's no kind of hint or anything. I mean, you do hear the Stenza in Ghost Monument, but there's not actually anything really physical, which was a shame, because it kind of makes each episode feel incredibly standalone. Like, you can kind of just watch any episode out of order, really, which in some way could be a good thing. Like, some people could see that as a good thing, but from a storytelling standpoint, it kind of comes across as a bit odd. But that being said, I think Tim Shaw in this episode is really good and really threatening, and he does like start an interesting question, which when you see him in Battle of Ranskorav Kolos, I think he becomes a lot more interesting in that episode in particular, given what he does, but we'll get to that. But yeah, he was very good in this episode, and as an introduction to the Doctor, I thought this was a really strong start. Again, watching this episode, this was my very first episode of Doctor Who, and I was like, yeah, I had a good time with it. I really enjoyed it, and she made a good impression. And obviously, you've got the really emotional stuff, which really kicked off the Graham Ryan arc with Grace getting killed. That was a big thing.
Yeah, I feel that it was, I don't know, some parts of me felt it was properly built to killing off Grace, and then part of me felt like it just happened. Like, she obviously throughout the episode they built up her relationship with Ryan and Graham, but she just kind of climbs up and then it just cuts away and she's like laying there on the floor, and we don't really that. And then I think after that it just straight up cuts away to the funeral scene.
Yeah.
If I'm so. I'm not sure if it's to do with the script or if it's to do with the way they edited the episode, but felt like if they'd shown a few more scenes of her when she's about to obviously climb up the tower and try and stop the gathering coil, I felt like it would have hit you a little bit more. It did hit me. I did shed a few tears for it, but I feel like it would have had me fully if they'd actually properly built up to that scene. Like, it's obviously they had the whole scene with like all of them up on the top of the crane, but the whole thing with Graham and Grace on the ground was kind of just like put to the background for like the Doctor and Graham and Ryan. No, sorry, the Doctor, Yasmin, and Ryan up on the cranes, and then it was not really focused on what she was doing down there. That's at least how I felt about it.
Yeah, it did feel kind of pushed to the side, which was interesting given the fact that, you know, a major character had just died. But it was a weird one. Looking back on this episode, like, I think I kind of agree with you that it's kind of decreased in terms of quality and as time's gone on in comparison to like other episodes we got. But I still think this was a really strong start point for this series, and in particular for Jodie Whittaker. I really enjoyed it, and the way the kind of characters all came together, because obviously Graham, Ryan, and Grace were all kind of together anyway. I mean, Yaz is it's kind of funny when you think about it, because Yaz was just kind of in the right place at the right time in order for her to be on this adventure. Like, if she wasn't the officer called out to that particular point, she wouldn't be a companion. But I'm glad she was.
Yeah, I think it was really convenient. That's one thing I did notice after rewatching it. It was just really convenient how she was the officer called out, and then she just happened to know Ryan from school.
Yeah, I did like that connection though. I like the fact that they were in school together. I thought that worked.
Yeah, it worked, but it felt kind of like, I don't know. It worked, but it was kind of tacked on for me.
Yeah, I could agree with that. So, in terms of like your overall ranking, like out of 10, what would you give The Woman Who Fell to Earth?
I'd say 6.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's a strong point. I'd probably go for a 7. I think it's a pretty decent start and gave us a good idea of what we could expect for the season. Now, for episode 2, Ghost Monument. In terms of my overall thoughts for this episode, I didn't love this episode, to be honest. This episode is basically just about getting the TARDIS. And I think that was an interesting plot point, but then they mixed it in with this race that was going on this planet, and I don't know, it just didn't really interest me. The side characters in it didn't really, like, as in the, you know, the new side characters that they introduced they didn't really do it for me in this episode, and I think this was one of the more forgettable ones.
Yeah, definitely. I feel it had some strong moments with like how they were explaining the Stanza's backstory on Desolation, how like they'd experimented on the planet, so the planet looks like that because of all the experiments they did. I did like the I can't exactly remember the names, like the pieces of cloth that surrounded them, and they used his cigarette to blow them all up. I did like them and how they had the whole thing with the timeless child with the Doctor, even though that wasn't paid off at all. But still, I feel like it was mostly character centered. That was the point of the episode. It was supposed to obviously get to the TARDIS, and I feel it kind of suffered from the fact that it was literally just travel across the planet to get to the TARDIS. There wasn't really much else plot to it other than the race, which I don't really think was a strong enough plot to hold the story forward. But
No.
One thing I do love about this episode, the opening scene is so well shot. I love how like everything works in together. How you start off, but I think it was with either Yasmin or Ryan, and you wake up as he wakes up in the episode. I think that was a really good use of like how they shot it and how we slowly learned of where they were going, and then eventually seeing the Doctor emerge from the dust when they all crash onto the Earth, and the Doctor's casual references to like previous historical figures or fictional characters that they confirm exist in that universe. How I don't remember who the character was she says she borrowed her glasses from, but I like those subtle references when she gives Graham glasses. I feel the robots, they didn't make much sense why they were on the planet in this episode, but as if you watch as the series goes on, it then makes sense why they're on that planet, kind of. But I thought they worked in the episode, and I did like the one scene how Ryan learns not to just run out into the with a gun, just run out,
Yeah.
and I, I think it was basically the Graham, Ryan, and the Doctor were the best parts of this episode, and the whole ending scene with the TARDIS and how that she gets confused. I like how she gets confused with her gender at the end of the episode as well. She's like, "Come to daddy, I mean, mommy,"
Yeah,
and
yeah.
her interactions with the TARDIS I really do like, and how she like leans up against the TARDIS like, I lost my key, sorry, and how it lets her in, and it's like it shows the bond they have with each other, and it shows the TARDIS as actually being a living thing and not just something that the Doctor uses to travel through time and space.
Yeah, I have to admit I really liked the scene when Ryan was like, "Oh yeah, play Call of Duty. I've trained for this," and he just like ran out. That was quite good. Yeah, I think for me, did Chibnall write this episode?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that explains it. For me, this episode just kind of came across a bit forgettable. Like I was kind of like after the first episode, I was on quite a high when it came to the series, and then I kind of went into this one. I was like, it's okay. It was fine. But yeah, it was just kind of like a mixed bag for me. I enjoyed it. I had fun with it, but I just feel like the main story of this race, I just didn't buy into it, and I didn't really care for it.
No.
The whole like over story with them actually getting the TARDIS was good, but kind of like the disguise, if you will, that they put it in terms of the story didn't work. I'd probably give this episode like a 5 out of 10.
I think 5.5 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, it's kind of just there in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, episode 3, Rosa. I'm just going to say this straight up. This is my favorite episode of the series. I thought this episode was amazing. Just, for me, I really love, particularly this episode and also episode 6, because of the time travel element and the element that they actually went to real historical events with real historical people. That's kind of what I loved about Rosa, and also obviously the emotional impact, which we'll get to. But what did you think overall?
Overall, it's an amazing episode. I think that Rosa works really well as a character. You really get to know her as a character, and it goes back again. It goes back to what Doctor Who was to begin with. Doctor Who, from what I've learned from 1963, it was made to educate people about stuff that happened in the past, and that is what this episode does. It tells an uncensored story about what happened with Rosa Parks, especially with that ending scene, which it hits you so hard. And obviously, throughout the episode, there are light-hearted moments throughout, which kind of balances out the tone, like the scenes with Graham and the Doctor in the hotel. And then when they're coming out of the bar after they were kicked out, and Graham's like, "Are we going to stop to have something to eat?" And he's like, "Have you noticed we don't stop to eat?"
Yeah. That was good. That was like the start for me of like this episode really kicked off Graham's humor, I think.
Oh yeah, I think his relationship with the Doctor, his friendship with the Doctor, is one of my favorite things going throughout this entire series, because they bounce off each other really well, especially in this episode with all, especially like I said earlier, the whole Banksy thing. It's like, "You're not Banksy," and she just turns around to him and is like, "Or am I?" And then again later on, she's like, "I bet Banksy doesn't have one of those."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of really good moments, and even like when the police officer comes into the apartment with Graham and the Doctor, and he says, "Oh, what's your name?" He goes, "Steve." Jobs. Like just little moments like that make Graham the character that he is.
Yeah.
I also really liked Ryan meeting not only with Rosa Parks but also with Martin Luther King Jr. I thought that was really good, especially because it was very realistically depicted in the sense that when he shows up and he's in the house with them, like he's very starstruck, and obviously the fact that obviously they don't know who they're gonna grow into over the next sort of 10 years or so, but he obviously does, and he's kind of, and given everything they did in terms of black rights and equal equality and things like that, which Ryan has to deal with in this episode, being a black man in the 60s, it hit him quite heavily. You could see that, and it was almost like a inspirational figure. So I like that contrast because it worked well for his character, because you could see that even like Ryan was getting really frustrated with everything, how he was being treated and how he had to hide all the time, which was very interesting. And so seeing them as like these people who could solve all these problems was really a good moment, I thought.
going off of that point as well, I really do the scene where obviously when the police officer comes in, Graham and Ryan go great no sorry Yasmin and Ryan, they go out back, and the whole scene with Yasmin and Ryan, how they're
Yeah.
talking about the future and how it's like it doesn't, and then how then later on Ryan goes to Rosa Parks and says it improves, but it's not perfect. I like that scene, and those two scenes, so they're probably my well, there is another scene that tops those two scenes, but those are some of my favorite scenes in the whole episode.
Yeah, I did really like that scene with Yaz and Ryan sort of behind the bin. I thought that was quite good. And I think, the whole point of this episode is they're trying to stop, obviously, this guy trying to basically stop Rosa from getting onto the bus at the specific moment necessary. And I thought that was a good story. I thought that was a good plot point. And it was, in a way, it was like a race against time, and everything had to be done like perfectly to make sure the timeline wasn't ruptured. I'm very much an expert when it comes to talking about timelines. So yeah, it was nice to see that, and I think that's obviously why that kind of story really worked for me. And even obviously you can skip to the end scene. Like that moment is, for me, that's the moment that sticks with me the most from the entire series. Is Rosa getting escorted from the bus, and the fact that Graham really wanted to stop it, and the doctor was like, no, we can't affect this, we can't change this has to happen, and the fact that Graham was just like really sad about that, I think that worked really well.
Oh yeah, I do think. Okay, I will slightly shoot down this episode. I do love this scene, but the music choice,
Yeah.
it doesn't work, but it does work. So there's two ways you can take it. Obviously, she's refusing to give up her seat and saying using the lyrics "Rise Up" doesn't exactly work. But the way I also saw it as is like they chose it, so you're rising up to be better than the people who are doing these things to you. That was the way I saw it, and that's how I've got past the whole music choice thing. I thought that was a good way to look at it as well. And I think with Graham in that scene, I think Bradley Walsh, he shows his acting range of how he goes from early on in the episode being comedic and happy just to going completely distraught in just ending scene with Rosa. And I do like when she looks back into the bus and she looks at Ryan, and just that exchange, I like. That was a nice touch on it as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the music choice, like I think the problem with it that I think a lot of people had, and also that I kind of picked up upon as well, is it's not necessarily the lyrics, although it is very on the nose. Is that it's almost very, it's kind of a thing that TV shows and films often do, where they'll play a really emotional, kind of gut punch of a song to kind of emotionally manipulate you. And I honestly feel like the scene would have worked just as well if they would have left the music out. Just because the whole idea of the scene, the concept of it, and how it was unfolding and how horrific it was, I think, maybe didn't necessarily need the music there. Like there's a scene we'll talk about in episode 6 in Demons of the Punjab, which I think did it almost, pretty much just as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like, that was kind of, that was my problem with it. It just kind of felt like it was emotionally manipulating when the scene was pretty emotional as is, so...
Yeah, I can see that. I definitely think if they'd gone for an instrumental soundtrack like they did in Demons, I feel it would have worked the same way. It wouldn't have changed the episode much, and the whole point of this thing that had been built up to throughout the episode. So even without the music, it still would have had that punch because we'd seen it build up to that point.
Yeah, it was definitely it was definitely a bit on the nose, but still, there's no denying how great that moment was. And like I say, this particular moment is the moment that sticks with me the most. Like when I look back on that series, that is what sticks out to me the most. So I'd probably give it a 9.
I'd say I agree with you on a 9 now.
Yeah, I think a 9's pretty solid. I think it was and like I said, in my opinion, this is the best episode of the series. Do you disagree with that one?
There is another episode I do like more, so
okay.
Yeah, we'll get onto that.
Okay. So episode 4, Arachnids in the UK.
Oh no.
Okay, well, I'm tempted to hear your thoughts now, so go ahead.
I don't like this episode at all. It's just, none of it works for me. The spiders, they use arachnophobia in this episode to try and play on you to make you be scared of it, and I don't like that. I don't think it works. I don't think the scientist lady who shows up, I don't remember her name. she's really stupid. The fact that she's just met the Doctor and their friends, and she's telling them everything about their so-say secret science project with the spiders. And she's just met them.
Yeah.
I like the scenes with Yaz's family. I love the Doctor's interactions with Yaz's father. It's like, well, I'm gonna go pick up this while you make your awful food.
Yeah.
And I do feel like she takes elements from the previous Doctors, so I feel like she's got elements of Peter Capaldi's, how like tough he was on people and how like he just brutal honesty. And then she also had an element of Matt Smith with her, where she's like, I'm attempting to, I think it was socialize, or I'm attempting to do small talk, and
Yeah.
I think the Donald Trump clone, I don't like him at all.
That's the kicker of this episode. I'm pretty sure they even reference Trump as well, and I'm pretty sure they name drop him, which is, very, like, if this was supposed to be like a Donald Trump like clone thing, then it probably would have been best to leave that out. But yeah, he was way too much, like way too much, not necessary at all.
And I like Nadia. I think that she's good as in the role she was in, and even though she just rolled over, and she was supposed to be, I think she was supposed to be the manager of that hotel, she just kind of rolls over and accepts that she was fired. That was a bit weird to me. And then going back to him, they made it so you wanted to hate him in that episode, and I felt they went too far in making it so you wanted to hate him, that you just don't like the episode as a whole because he's in it. And then I don't like going to the ending scene. I don't like how it's resolved. He just walks in, shoots the spider, and his impact on the series can be described of how he just walks out of the scene and he's never spoken about again.
Yeah.
I could go on for hours about this episode, so if you want to chime in about it.
Yeah, it's, for me, like, this episode, again, isn't exactly one of the strongest. It's kind of, the whole spider thing, I like the trailer for the episode, and I was quite excited about this one. I was kind of like, yeah, this is a cool idea. Haven't they done something similar to this in the past?
Yeah, there was, I believe it was in the classic era, there was the Planet of the Spiders, which, from what I've heard, is done so much better. They think the spiders are actually threatening, even though they have less of a budget in the classic era. The spiders are done better in that episode than they are in this episode. And honestly, I don't think the spiders look that good in terms of CGI, and I don't like how they just use house spiders. Like, it was mostly just house spiders throughout this entire episode.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, they don't look great, and the way they kind of move is incredibly odd. And obviously Doctor Who's not the most high budget in terms of shows, but yeah, they came across really, really kind of just slow and therefore not very, very threatening. And I mean, I guess if you do have arachnophobia, if you have like a real fear of spiders, then it might creep you out. And like, I feel like it depends on how you make a spider look, and I think like the bigger a spider is, like, it can look more scary. Like, I don't know if you've ever played the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim.
Yeah.
You know, in like the kind of opening section of that game, and you go through the cave, and there's like these massive spiders that attack you.
Yep.
Then they freak me out. Okay, they freak me out. They are horrible looking. Okay, but these not so much.
No. And they try and make you feel sorry for the Queen at the end of the episode, and I don't feel it was at all.
Yeah, it wasn't very earned. It kind of came across as like, oh, animal rights. that's kind of how it felt to me. But I did enjoy the stuff with Yaz and her family in this. Again, not really much growth in terms of Yaz's character, but I did enjoy seeing, her family, because they were quite funny. Like, her dad was very amusing. And again, like the Doctor in that scene, like you mentioned earlier, which is like, oh yeah, I'm trying social skills, it's a work in progress, or something along those lines.
I also liked how Jazz's sister just casually starts flirting with Ryan for I thought that was quite funny, and I thought Nadia, when she's then she looks at the Doctor and looks at Yaz and is like, are you two seeing each other? I think that was where this whole shipping thing comes into play, because they set it up so people can latch onto that. So it's like, are you two seeing each other? And the Doctor's like, I don't think we are we? Yeah. And yeah, I don't like this episode at all, and I don't think okay, one thing I do like is how they defeat the spiders, kind of, even though they just kind of leave them there in the hotel. Nothing is really resolved in this episode, but using music to lure the spiders, I thought was pretty funny.
Yeah, I did enjoy. Was it Stormzy they used?
Yeah.
Yeah, that, like the fact that Graham used Storm, I thought that was really funny. Yeah. Again, just that Graham humor that is always good. So yeah, this episode is one of the weaker ones of the series. I thought it was just kind of, yeah, it kind of had like this ugly taste all over it, really. And by the end, you just kind of end with like a dirty taste in your mouth. I'd probably give it a 4.
4, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not great. But even worse is episode 5, the Saranga conundrum, or however it is pronounced, that no one actually knows how to pronounce it. This episode was quite frankly god awful. I'm just going out there and saying it. Just it was so boring. Like, this episode was really boring. Like, there was just nothing to it. Like, it just kind of, you had really dull side characters in this. Like the guy who died about halfway through. Which, I like that actor. I've seen him in other things. I like that guy. But he was just wasted in this and is just gone. And just the whole idea of it, the whole concept, I just didn't work for me at all.
This episode is like, the formula for this episode should work. It's a formula that Doctor Who has used for so many years. I believe it's called Base Under Siege. They've done it so many times. I was looking forward to this episode because in the trailer they should made it off like a Base Under Siege. Even in the synopsis, they described the Pating as the most dangerous creature in the universe.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's really not. The Pating, I thought it looked decent, but it was just kind of there for there to be a threat in the episode. Otherwise, it was just them. It was a commentary on a lot of things in this episode. So obviously you had the captain was interesting. I thought she was an interesting character and how she was dealing with like they made up a illness for her. I think it was pilot's fever or captain's fever, pilot's something like that. I thought that was interesting seeing her deal with it and seeing how she needed the insulin shots, I believe it was. I thought that was interesting, and I thought the Doctor's interactions with the guy at the start, their chemistry, they worked really well.
Yeah.
Like, and then obviously he ends up being ejected out of the space pod, and then the episode just goes downhill from there.
Yeah, pretty much. What did you think about the pregnant guy?
I thought it was. I thought a lot of people don't think it works. A lot of people see it as pushing an agenda, but I don't think so. I think it works in this universe of Doctor Who because it makes sense because he's an alien race, and it's not like it's the man that gives birth to both females and females. In his race, the male gives birth to the male, and the female gives birth to the females.
I actually really like that. I like that idea. I wasn't exactly a big fan of the character as a whole. I just didn't really. Although the moments again with Ryan and Graham with him, I liked all that. But yeah, the actual idea of males giving birth to males and vice versa, I liked that. I thought that was good.
Yeah, but again, Yaz she ran around the episode just asking questions, and I don't know what the Doctor doesn't explain much. Especially in the conclusion, it's just like give me a number, and then it turns out to be something that was actually important. It's like you should. She does. I know it's Chris Chibnall's writing. He doesn't give the Doctor much explanation unless it's like a really long monologue. So I don't remember what she was explaining. I think it was like something to do with particle acceleration or something, and how the whole ship was powered. And the way that was shot was just awful for me. It was just a constant cutting between Jodie's hands and then her face explaining it.
Yeah.
I thought
isn't this when Yaz brought in like Yaz started talking about like her science GCSE or something in this scene?
Yeah, she was like, oh yeah, they taught that to me in science. Like they taught something to you that's being used in like I think it was the 31st century in the 21st century science. I don't think that's somehow gonna happen, but
yeah, that was a bit dumb. And then speaking of dumb, the Pating was just terrible. I mean, the fact that they described it like you say, like the most dangerous creature in the universe. Like the fact that you get kicked around like a football doesn't give me that image, writers. I'm sorry. It just kind of came across because it was way too cute. That was the problem, and I guess that was supposed to be the idea, was the fact that it was like the most cute thing in the universe can be like the most dangerous thing, because I believe that's like a thing that's in real life. There's like an animal. I think it might be like a monkey of some sort that's like really like adorable looking, but it's like one of the most dangerous animals on the planet or something like that. But I think maybe that's what they were going for, but it just didn't, because the CGI on it was kind of good-ish. It was it just kind of came across as a bit just odd. And yeah, it was just incredibly weak kind of thing.
And it was for the most dangerous, so say the most dangerous creature in the universe. It was so stupid.
Yeah.
It walked right in at the end. It walked right into the bomb and just ate the bomb and exploded and just went on his happy way into space.
Yeah.
That was, it was Chris Chibnall's writing is he can't write conclusions. I'm sorry, I don't think he can write conclusions at all. I think the only one that was satisfying well, he has two satisfying conclusions. I think that's the woman who fell to Earth, and then possibly when we got into the Battle of Ren Square of Colossus.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah,
So,
I can see that.
I don't like this episode at all, and I feel like it shows that Chris Chibnall didn't know what he was doing. He had a year to write this series, and Stephen Moffat, he was supposed to write the 2017 Christmas special, I believe, but Stephen Moffat ended up writing that so he could keep the time slot, which Chris Chibnall then threw away the next year, but never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like he had so much time to write this, and he comes up with an episode like this. I don't think it's good at all.
No, this is for me the worst episode of the series for sure. I'm giving it a 3.
I'd say 2.5, honestly.
Yeah, I was thinking about going for a 2, but then I was kind of like, nah, I won't be. I'll be generous. But yeah, it's for me that's definitely the weakest episode of the series. Episode 6, Demons of the Punjab. This was, as we mentioned earlier, this was advertised as kind of Yaz's episode. Not quite, but it was still a good episode in its own right. I think this episode was really, really good. One thing that I was kind of on the fence with, and I still go back and forth with it now, thinking about it, was the monsters of this episode. Because they come off and you think, oh, here's the threat of the episode. But then you find out that no, they come around and they kind of respect fallen soldiers. And it's no coincidence that this was aired on Remembrance Day.
Oh yeah.
No coincidence whatsoever. And I feel like that did work. I think that did work in that sense. I just found them, when it was revealed that they were, kind of like these Remembrance soldiers, I kind of just felt like, well, what was the point in them?
I honestly, I don't think so. I like the concept because the whole concept, what the Doctor thought of them to begin with. They were originally, their race was assassins who went around the universe targeting specific people and taking them out. And then I thought that how they saw their entire civilization wiped out, all that's left of their planet is just smithereens and like gases and different types of things that make up a planet. And I thought that worked perfectly for me, how they then go around and respect the people who die alone because nobody else is going to mourn them, because they themselves can't mourn their own people because they're all gone and they have no way of mourning them because they're just literally gas. I thought that worked really well, and I thought the whole thing where the Doctor ends up stealing that thing and she couldn't work out what it was, and then they take her onto a ship and explain what it is.
Yeah.
I thought that worked so well. But I think also, I think was Yaz's grandmother's name Umbrine?
Umbrine, yeah.
I thought she was a good character in this episode, and I thought she worked well with the whole mystery behind why this person she's marrying isn't Yaz's grandfather.
Yeah.
I liked that whole mystery.
Yeah, plus the character who... I can't remember, what was the character's name? The one who wasn't Yaz's grandfather. He was a great character. Prem. Yeah, he was very good. He was really good in this episode. Like, he was definitely the standout for me, like, watching this episode. I thought he was excellent. Especially when you look at him, obviously, towards the end. His like emotion, his kind of determination, I thought he was brilliant. My favorite thing about this episode, for sure, though, is that it actually, we were talking earlier about how Doctor Who was there to educate people. I didn't know about any of this. I didn't know about the splitting of India and Pakistan. I didn't know about that at all. I'd never heard of that, and I'm quite a big history buff as well. I know my stuff, but I'd never heard of this, and that was refreshing for me.
Yeah, I honestly, even though this episode doesn't go as in depth necessarily as Rosa does on going whole uncensored, I feel like they balance this episode up with like the romance films with Umbrine getting married. But I do like how they show that it's what happened, and I tell you what happened, and it's pretty much accurate to what happens in that time. And I like how my favorite scene in the episode is the wedding scene where the Doctor marries Umbrine. I felt her whole speech about the power of love and I thought that was really really good. I thought that how it was really sweet how I think Umbrine and her husband they've exchanged things that were relevant to their own beliefs. So obviously he gave her the watch, which was relevant to the episode of why it was cracked, and then I don't remember what she did for him, but I thought that was a nice touch. And then Graham in the episode talking to Manish about all they can strive to be is good men. I thought that was
Yeah,
a standout moment for him in this series.
yeah. Because it was one of those moments where, like we say, Graham is kind of the comedy relief for the series, and he obviously does get some very funny moments, but that was like a nice, serious moment that really grounded him.
Yeah, and he he doesn't, unlike Yaz in say Rosa or the Serenga Conundrum or any other episode. Graham doesn't fall into the background of this episode. He makes his presence known whenever he gets lines to say. He's there. He makes his presence known and he has an impact on the episode, even if he's not the focus of the episode. That is one thing I like about his character as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a very, very good one, and I did enjoy all of his moments here. Now, the ending of this, obviously, you had the other guy who was in the village, who was very much pro the split, and
Yeah.
the way he kind of shows up with the army and things, and just this final moment, like this final standoff with him and Prem. I love this scene because this is what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about Rosa. This scene I think works just as well, and this doesn't have any like big bombastic music going on. This just works very well just as an emotional moment, and I like the fact that the companions and the TARDIS team they walk away and they don't necessarily watch it. They kind of leave it for the monsters to go and watch it. I thought that was a nice little moment, and again, it felt emotional. You felt it without it necessarily being shoved down your throat. So
Yeah.
I think it works so much better in that way.
Yeah, I think especially in the ending scene, you see, I think it cuts away. You just hear the gunshot, and then the monsters appear, and they say, "We will take care of him from here," and that's where it pretty much ends. I thought that was such a good way to end it, and it rounds off the episode, and it doesn't necessarily play on your heartstrings. The fact that obviously you're sad that he died, but it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't shove it down your throat that you should be sad that he's dead. It kind of just it levels out and it kind of I'm not exactly sure how to put it. It's like it's a nice way to round it off. That's
Yeah, I think
yeah,
I think it was like, again, it just kind of worked in a way that was not forceful, and I enjoyed
yeah,
that. And then there was just other things going on in this episode. I felt like just the relationship that they established between Umbrine and Prem, because I like the fact that obviously Yaz was obviously very confused. She was like, "That's not my granddad." And there was, like you say, that mystery that you mentioned earlier. I think that was actually very compelling. And then the way it links into the watch, and even the way this links into the end of the episode when Yaz is talking to Umbrine in the modern day, and Umbrine is now prepared to tell her about the watch, and she says, "No, I don't want to know." I think that, even though obviously she already did know, I thought that was a nice way to end off the episode.
yeah, definitely. And this is the first half. This is the first. Okay, so Rosa was technically written by a guest writer. It was Mallory Blackman, I believe. But this was the first pure guest writer episode, and I was saying this episode you can tell what are the guest written episodes, and I felt like they need to get Vinay Patel back for series 12.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because this is one of the standouts. Like, for me, like, Rose is my favorite, but this is my second favorite.
Yeah, this is my second favorite, but
Your
we'll get on
favorite is
to
still something else, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't actually know what this is, so I'm still excited to see which one it's going to be. Actually, I have a feeling, it could be episode 7. But anyway, so what would you give Demons?
8.5 out of 10, easily.
Yeah, I'd probably go for the same with that. Yeah, I'd probably go for an 8.5. So, episode 7, Kablam. Probably the most fun episode of the bunch. And kind of like how Demons landed on Remembrance Day, this also landed around Black Friday. And I love the concept of this episode. I absolutely love it. So you have this delivery company that goes all across the universe, and I like the fact that one of the Kablam bots just shows up on the TARDIS and finally delivers the fez that Matt Smith ordered. I thought that was even though obviously it didn't have the impact on me, I was aware of it, so I did get that reference. And I thought that was really fun. And then just the way we kind of go to this place, like, like to Kablam. I just thought it worked so well. It was such a fun episode.
Yeah, I there's so much to talk about in this episode. I love obviously the Kaplan bots and the whole thing with Matt Smith's payoff. It links in perfectly with I think it was a series 5 episode, The Big Bang, where he's just saved the universe. He puts his hand on his head. He's like, "Oh, I can buy a fez," and then it links into this episode. She puts that fez on him. She's like, "What do you think? Is it still me? I must have I must have ordered this a very long time ago." I Kablam, was honestly for being a commentary on Amazon, it's pretty funny because
Yeah.
it took 2 regenerations to get a delivery.
Yeah, that was definitely very very funny. I enjoyed that, and one of my favorite things about all this was the just the Kablam bots. They came across very kind of weeping angels to me, and I did enjoy that. I enjoyed the fact that they were just like these creepy kind of robots who kind of followed you around, and you would just look into their eyes and there was just like nothing there. I thought that was really, they were kind of like these heartless, soulless things, but were still very, very intelligent. I thought that was very good. I liked that. Also, I think I loved every single side character in this one. Like whether you're looking at the boss or the woman who was in this, the villain. Obviously, Lee Mack was a big one. I love Lee Mack in this. He was great.
I like how his character got paid off in the end. How they end up after obviously his character ends up dying, so they end up giving the I think it was a necklace or pendant thing that his daughter had given him, and they end up taking it back to. Obviously, we don't see that on screen, but I liked how they obviously linked that in, and the Kablam bots were so creepy, and I like how Doctor Who has a thing. They like making completely normal objects and then making people terrified of them. So they did it with statues of the Weeping Angels. They made a 7-year-old child creepy with the gas mask zombies and the empty child. And now we've got the Kablam bots, and the bubble wrap, deadly bubble wrap. I can never look at bubble wrap the same way again because of this episode.
Yeah, that was really good. Oh, like the bubble wrap, so especially like when Graham was like just so tempted to do it, was really good. I just think the episode of this, like the concept of it, just the way they're able to, like you say, play on Amazon, I think was really really smart. And I love the villain of this episode as well. I thought like he was very believable in his motivations, and he actually kind of made sense and actually was quite investing. So I really liked him.
Yeah, I feel like towards the end of the episode, they kind of lose the point of the episode of obviously being a commentary on Amazon, and they try and make you side with like Amazon. So they paint him as the bad guy, even though he's the person who's trying to fight for the people to keep their jobs. Obviously, because I believe Kablam had to employ 10% of organics, so people, they called them organics in the episode, and he was trying to fight so there was more people who had those jobs. So they kind of vilified somebody who was doing something good but in a bad way.
Yeah, it's kind of like Killmonger in Black Panther a little bit.
Yeah, that is a really good comparison actually. But I think the episode as a whole, and then the ending where they end up offering her a job, and the doctor just responds with, "We're strictly freelance."
Yeah,
I like this. This is where she starts to show signs of who she is, and people have dubbed Jodie as the empathetic doctor, and you can kind of see that in this episode, I feel, as well.
Yeah, like the scene with Charlie at the end in the Kablam bots when like they're all about to blow up and he's in there. She's like, get out, just come up here, like, get out. You can still save yourself. There's still time. You can see that compassion there.
Yeah, and I find it hilarious how this episode was leaked on Amazon the week before it came out.
Yeah, that's like there's a level of irony there that's almost too much of a coincidence.
I feel like
go on.
I kind of feel like Amazon knew that this episode. I know it's probably unlikely, but I feel like Amazon knew this was a commentary on them, and then intentionally leaked the episode out to like try and get their own back. And it's probably unlikely, but it's just a funny thing to think of.
Yeah, I did enjoy pretty much everything in this episode. Like,
yeah.
I just thought, like, again, it was just fun. Like, the scene with Ryan, Yaz, and Charlie, like, going down the conveyor belt. Like, again, just, it's not particularly anything meaningful. It's not anything particularly substantial, but it's just fun. and it's a fun idea to watch. I mean, very much Toy Story 2 inspired, but still, Toy Story 2 is an absolute masterpiece. So I'm not gonna complain about that.
Yeah.
But the conveyor belt scene, I just thought was really good, and the fact that, again, like we mentioned earlier, like Ryan was like, "Oh, I know my way around these places. I know what I'm doing here," and he was able to take the lead there, and I thought that was good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely interesting. I thought the villain twist was good. I like what they did with that female side character as well. In terms of her payoff.
Yeah, because she. Oh, wait, you're talking about the one who was killed in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked the whole side plot of how she was it was essentially his fault, that the reason why she was killed, because the system was sending the Kablam bots to try and get him, and then obviously they stopped the Kablam bot, and then they use her because they know that the system was seeing that they have a relationship together, and then she ends up being a victim of what his whole plan. I thought that was really good payoff.
Yeah, and I like the idea as well. It was like, the idea of the system. I thought that was cool. The idea of, there's like the fault in the system, but then the fault in the system is actually the people and things like that. I thought that was quite good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I loved Kablam. Like, after watching this episode, I was just laughing and I'm just smiling, because like I say, even though it's not my favorite episode, it's my third favorite in terms of this ranking. Just because it's not as emotionally impactful or as engaging as, Demons or Rosa. It's just a fun episode. And this was kind of like, given what I knew about Doctor Who going into this series, this was the one that kind of reminded me the most. This is like what I was expecting.
Yeah, this is the most like Doctor Who.
Yeah, it's because I was kind of aware of a lot of the villains and things like that, and the Kablam bots reminded me a lot of that. So I probably give this episode an 8.5.
At 8.5, yeah.
Yeah. So now moving on to episode 8, The Witchfinders. Yeah, I thought this was a pretty good episode.
This is my favorite episode of the series,
here
actually.
We go. Right.
So, I loved the whole concept behind the episode. The Witchfinders, obviously the witch trials, and then the whole place that doesn't exist. I liked how the whole place doesn't exist, and how it was paid off at the end of the episode of why the place doesn't exist. Alan Cumming, he was really good as King James, even though. I felt like I warmed up to him as the episode went through. His first introduction when he first walks in, I did feel like was slightly overacted, but I know why. They were obviously playing on the fact that King James was known as to be the monarch who was slightly. He wasn't straight, but he wasn't gay. It was kind of like people in history, I believe people dubbed him as that kind of,
yeah.
And I like how they played on that as a whole, and I like how he had that whole thing with Ryan at the start of the episode as well. Obviously, I thought Jodie. This is my favorite performance from Jodie. Her whole scene where she's like, honestly, if I was still a man, I could just get the job done without having people questioning me what I was doing. And then her going on with that, the scene with Graham was like, you what are you doing right now? You're snooping. And it's like, don't worry, Graham, I'm gonna stay here and fix this, even if I am a woman. I thought that was really good.
Yeah. I thought, I think this is like the moment where Jodie's performance really began to show through, because you got the frustration there. Especially when it came to, what was the character's name? The villain, the female character in this. I can't remember her name now. But like the way her story kind of went alongside, I think was really interesting. And again, it showed a little bit more of Jodie's range. Which again I still feel like could be a lot more explored come next series, but this is one of the episodes where you really got to see it. In regards to Alan Cumming, he was just amazing in this. I've seen a lot of people like say he was like too over the top, but I loved it. Like, I was completely here for it. Like, just seeing him just be so incredibly camp, I thought was brilliant. I was just like watching this episode just laughing so heavily at him, and again his play off with Ryan I think is really fun, especially because if you do read into the history, there is kind of the idea that he was potentially gay, and he slept around with a lot of men even though he was married to a woman. So the fact they played on that I thought was smart. I thought that was really really quite good. And the story with, the little girl whose mother was murdered for being a witch, again, very historically accurate in the sense that we see that, it doesn't matter if they were a witch or not, because they're going to die anyway, pretty much. Because that's one thing I remember when I was learning about the Salem witch trials in school and things. The fact that if you died, then you were innocent. Like, I just found that completely baffling, and you see that here.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest sort of standout for me in this episode though was definitely the villain. Like you find out about the tree.
The Morats they were imprisoned underneath the tree, and the only reason they were released was it makes sense in the era as well, because people who lived in that era, they did want the perfect view, and the only reason she cut down the tree is because it's obstructing her view. And I the Morats, they were the first time since Tim Shaw that I was actually kind of threatened, and they were the first villain that was properly evil. Like, you can make a case for Tim Shaw being not quite so evil because he was just doing a ritual that his species had done for generations, whereas the Morats were completely evil. They wanted to take over the world, and I thought that was refreshing, honestly, after the villains that we had going through the series.
Yeah, like, and also the design of them, they were creepy. Like they were actually quite scary looking. I mean, particularly because they were like they were essentially zombies in terms of how they looked. So getting to see that kind of design was like pretty insane. And they were very scary. I thought.
Yeah, I can agree with that, especially their design when they're in the human form, when they still hadn't fully been taken over, and when she just takes the bit of earth from the doctor, and you just look at her hand, and you can see like the bits like just slime off coming off of her hand, and it wasn't like coming out dripping off of her hand, it was just like on her hand, balanced on her hand, and it's. I thought it was really good design, really good. I'm not sure if it was quite CGI, or if it was completely prosthetic based, but it was really good. I thought that what was her name? Becca was her name. That was
Becca,
what her
yeah.
name was. I thought that her payoff at the end, when she actually, the reason why she was actually dunking people for being a witch was because she was actually turning into one of the Moraks. She had released one, and she was turning into one, and she ends up obviously turning into the queen. I think it was she turns into.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can make a lot of comparisons, honestly. You can make a lot of comparisons to the symbiote from Venom and this, and
Yeah.
they kind of play it off like that with how they take the body over as well. I thought that was quite interesting, and um, I overall this is my favorite episode of the series. There was so much like Jodie was perfect. I think she was perfectly acted in this episode. She reacted right to for what she in the situation she was in. She acted really well. The ending scene I loved so much, where
Yeah.
she turns around to King James after he thought she'd been pissed at him for the entire time because of what he did with the marks. Obviously, I think he ended up killing the queen when they were
Yeah, he
sending her
did,
back.
yeah.
And she just turns around to him. He's like, "Well, why are you going in the box for?" And she's like, "A great man once said that any sufficiently advanced form of technology is indistinguishable from magic. We're just
Yeah.
about to prove him right." That that is like, yes, I'm on board with you as the Doctor now. I love that scene.
Yeah, I've always loved that concept, the idea of, advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic to a primitive mind. I think that's a really interesting concept, so the fact that they played on that was really good. Because I remember, like, in Thor, the very first Thor Marvel film, like, they kind of played on that as well, in the fact that magic and science were kind of the same thing
Yeah.
in that world, and I enjoyed that, and they play on it here. It works very well in that sense. Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I wasn't too sure about it going into it, but I did end up really loving this episode. And again, I think Jodie was on point in this one. And Alan Cumming just made it for me. So
Yeah.
I'd probably give this episode 9.
9.5.
Yeah, it was very good. It was definitely one of the strongest. Episode 9. It Takes You Away. This episode for me, it started out kind of weak for me, but then as soon as you get about halfway through and they introduced the mirror dimension, it got a lot better.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I do like how I thought the start one of the opening scenes where the Doctor just starts talking to the sheep and they start referencing the relations between humans and
Yeah.
sheep in the future.
Yeah, I really hope they like explore that at some point, because that's really like because they have like quite a few lines about it, like at the beginning and the end. Like I even like at the end when Jodie's like, "Oh, they're probably plotting," I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and one thing I will pick up on is they actually cast a blind actress for this role, for the little girl, and that's one thing I do praise Doctor Who so much for. If they write a person who has a disability, they go out and find somebody who has that disability, who's an actor and actress, and they cast them in that role. They don't cast anybody who doesn't have the disability. They get people in who specialize and know about like living with that, and I thought that really added to her character and added to the whole plot of the episode as well.
Yeah, I will say personally, I wasn't a big fan of the girl who played her. I just didn't find her that good personally. I mean, I respect the idea of them, actually getting a blind actress to play this role. I just personally, I didn't think she was that good. I don't know how you feel about her.
Um, I have I have mixed feelings on her. Honestly, I thought that at the start of the episode when she's explaining the whole situation, I thought the whole tone that she was explaining how there's a monster outside. I thought it was kind of paid off weakly, but the whole concept of her being terrified and staying in the house, and then um, her finding out that her father was in this dimension, other dimension, and the way to get to him was through the mirror, and she ends up knocking out Ryan and going through herself. I thought was interesting, but I I don't know. She kind of came. She didn't. She doesn't have that on-screen presence that I felt like she could have had if she was like given enough like to work with, kind of.
Yeah, yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah, it just kind of for me, I just kind of seen her almost a little bit annoying, and I was kind of just like, okay, let's kind of move on with this because the idea that she was very naive with her father, the fact that her father, left her essentially just in this house. The father though was an interesting character because obviously he went off and he found this kind of mirror dimension within the house, and he's been spending time with his wife who was dead. And the fact that he locked the girl in the house and then was using like a speaker just to make these monster noises outside the house to keep her in. Because they kind of tease throughout the episode that, oh, there's these monsters outside, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. But then I actually like that twist. Like, it completely undercuts the entire episode, but I thought it was good nonetheless. I actually thought it was an interesting twist. And I also like the fact that, Ryan was so heavily convinced that the dad was dead.
Yeah.
That, it's just like, oh, he's definitely done a runner here. And I even like as well, before the doctor goes into the mirror dimension, she writes on the thing, assume the dad is dead. I like that as well. I thought that was good. Ryan was really good in this episode, actually. Like I say, episode 7 was like the first sort of turn for him, and then in this, he was really good.
You can see his growth in this episode. He obviously because he starts off, he's only drawing from his own experiences when he tells the girl that her dad's probably done a runner, because that's what his dad did essentially.
Yeah.
His dad doesn't have much contact with him at all, so he's just drawing from his own past. You can't really fault him for that much because he's not really had much experience dealing with children. Obviously, Jasmine, she does kind of because she's obviously had to be trained to it because of the police officer role. But he does. I feel like he does handle it well as the episode goes on.
Yeah.
And then obviously by the end of the episode, she ends up giving him a hug before he leaves.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good arc for them to go for just a single episode. And I love the whole all of the stuff in the mirror dimension. Well, when they get into the other alternate reality, but speaking about the stuff in, I don't remember what they call it. I'm just gonna refer to it as the mirror dimension. The person who was in there was interesting. You first think he's kind of like he's stuck there, but he's not because he could just go through either portal at the time.
Like the middle bit in between the two. Yeah.
I think, and the whole thing of the killer moths, and that's another thing of, just another thing of the Doctor Who making something that shouldn't be terrifying. The fact that when he gets one on the light, he doesn't explain what it was. He just casually gets rid of it, and then he's like, "We need to go because more will be coming." He doesn't tell you why, and then he obviously ends up dying. And Graham has a good moment in this as well. It's like he ends up swiping the Doctor's Sonic, I believe. And then Graham trips him and was like, "How's that for an old codger?"
Yeah, that was good. The killer moths were definitely interesting. Definitely a fun choice for that. That whole like in between, they did have a name for it, but I can't remember what it was. But that in between section, I think maybe they could have spent the entire episode inside of there. I think that was really kind of a lot more interesting. But given the character who shows up later on, it's clear they kind of had to do this episode, because when you go into the mirror dimension onto the other side, and it's basically just where every character, where people who have died kind of manifest in a way. They had Grace show up, which I was waiting for this. Like I was like, when's Grace? Because I knew she was going to show up again at some point in this series. So I was like, they've got to pay this off some way, and they've got to give Graham some kind of finality with this. And I was like, and when I saw like, oh, this guy who's going to find his dead wife, I was like, okay, here we go. And yeah, she does show up, and it was nice to see Grace again. But I like the fact that Graham had to be convinced that it's not her, and he was like, no, it is. Like clearly it's her. But I like the fact that he gets little hints as well when she starts talking, and she is very evidently just not caring of Ryan at all. The fact that Ryan was stuck in the in-between, and like she was just like, oh, forget him, you're with me now, and things like that.
Yeah, I did like how obviously the Doctor was there. She had to convince both of them that that wasn't the real person that they loved, and obviously then it pays off later with the Doctor. But when she's talking to Graham, and he's so determined that it's her, and honestly it hits you hard. For me at least, it hits you hard because you've had that whole arc with Graham. He constantly goes back to talking about her throughout the series, especially in the Ghost Monument when they bring up the stanza, and he just goes to straws like, my wife was killed by them, and then it goes throughout. There are some scenes throughout this series. It was built up to for me, and seeing Grace again, I almost broke into tears. But there was another moment in this episode which made me smile and did make me cry as well. And we'll get onto that in a little bit. But I felt the payoff with the Doctor having to go back. I don't like that at all. I don't know what you think about that whole decision of the way they went down with the solar tracks.
Yeah, it was a bit of an odd one. But I think there's a much more odd choice that they go with later on in the episode.
Yeah, I'll talk about that now. To me personally, I felt like the episode would have had more of a punch. People disagree with me on Twitter so much about this point, but I feel like that it should have been somebody who the Doctor knew, who the Doctor wouldn't want to let go of. Yeah. Because the other two characters had that, and she didn't. She just had a frog.
A bloody frog. And what I didn't get either was the fact that it was Grace's voice. I didn't understand why that was relevant.
They kind of explain it as Grace had a thing for frogs, so the frog took that memory of Grace, and then it took her voice because she liked frogs. That was kind of their way of explaining it. And another way somebody else has explained it to me is that the reason why it's a frog is the universe is so big, wide, and vast that it doesn't know how to present itself, so it just presents itself as a frog. And I don't know if I buy that, but that is one way of thinking of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, this entire final scene just doesn't work for me. And I don't know if it is just the frog, but it's just like the idea of like, the universe, the entire universe being manifested into this one thing. It didn't work for me, if I'm honest.
Although I do like the concept of the universe, this other universe who wants to exist in our own universe, but it can't without destroying the entire universe. I thought that was an interesting point. And another thing I will pick up on is in the trailer they make the Doctor doing the kiss as it built up as an emotional or something built up to a moment, and it was just the Doctor kissing goodbye to the frog.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, I remember that in the trailer. Yeah, because I remember seeing that in the trailer because it's how they close off the trailer, and I was like, okay, I wonder what that's gonna do. But it was a frog. Okay, sure, whatever. Sure. So I'd probably say this was like a 7.
7. It has solid points, but it doesn't finish it off very well.
I just think the best thing about this entire episode is the fact that they hint about a sheep revolution. I need to see that. I'm sorry, like if Chibnall can make that happen, then I will take back everything I've ever said about him. So episode 10. We have the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos, one of the most long titles ever. This episode has improved for me as time's gone on. I mean, it's only been a week, but like it's improved for me ever since it released. Because when I first watched it, I'll be honest, I was like, probably one of the weaker ones. But as time's gone on, it has gotten better for me.
I honestly, I'm not the complete opposite to you, but first viewing, I really liked it, and a lot of things worked in it for me. It has slightly degraded, but it still stands out as like I'd say it's top five. It's not top three in the series. It's in the top five of my list for this series, and there's a lot of things that work in this episode. The Ux, I like the concept, and I like the fact that they bring in something. So Doctor Who has tried to do things like try to introduce people with superpowers before, and they did it in an episode which was completely focused around superheroes, which didn't work. But I like how the Ux were just a race of people who just have these powers, and I like the whole thing of how they can shape the I think it was explained they can shape the reality around them, and I like how they were manipulated by the villain of this episode, Tim Shaw. I thought that worked really well. The whole concept of the planet messing with your mind as you go out into it if you don't have these neurostabilizers that the Doctor had was an interesting concept as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed this one. I think Graham for me was the standout here because again he knew that Tim Shaw was around, and he was like, if I see him, I'm gonna kill him. And I like the fact that the Doctor was, if you kill him, then you become the same as him. You become just as bad as him, and you're not traveling with me if you become a killer. I like that. I like the fact she just put a stop to it right there. And I like the fact that even Graham was persistent. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, all right, Doc. It was like, no, I'm still gonna, if I see him, And I like the payoff at the end as well. The fact when he shoots him in the foot, it's just the foot. It's just the foot. It's not, that was really good. And the way he locks him up and everything. I like the conclusion to him and Tim Shaw. And I really liked Tim Shaw in this episode because I liked him in the first episode that he showed up in, but I was kind of just like, eh. But here, I like the fact that he just, to the Ux, who are an incredibly primitive species and a very disconnected species, the fact that they saw Tim Shaw and he was like just basically told them that he was a god and they didn't know any better, and they treated him like a god because again that's what he told them. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I like that Tim Shaw ends up. So is this whole episode, the reason why this whole episode happened was the Doctor's fault, technically, and that comes back to bite her. And he even references that. It's like, everything, you sent me back, and then obviously he was exiled for failing his plan. He was sent to that planet. And I do like how he was represented as a god, and I do like what you said, how Graham had that whole thing with he shot him in the foot. But I liked more how Ryan spoke to him about it. It's like, if you kill him now, you that's not what Grandma would want. That's what she wouldn't tell you to do that, even though that's what he thought she would tell him to do. So he said in the episode that if she was here now, she'd say go and get revenge for him. But then Ryan's like, hang on, no, that's not what she would have said. She wouldn't have said something like that. And I think that throughout the series he's kind of got a distorted view of what she would have said in his head because he's got so rage filled with what happened with Tim Shaw, and then it manifested in this episode where he was going to kill him. And Graham comes out the better person in this episode and how he deals with Tim Shaw and how they deal with him.
Yeah, I definitely thought that Graham's arc, it definitely came full circle in this episode, and I think it worked really well for him. Just seeing the way that it all closed off was brilliant. And the way that they took down Tim Shaw, they got the fist bump there, that was really good. We forgot to mention as well in episode 9 that we did get the Grandad line finally, which was yes. Good. Graham had a lot of good moments, especially my favorite moment with Graham in this entire thing was with the robots, and he said "Yippee-ki-yay." That was great. that was amazing. And he got to blow them all up. And then other things in this episode I did enjoy was I'm really bad at remembering the side characters' names in this series, but the guy who they come across pretty much immediately, the owner of that, he was like the member of that crew.
Yeah, I like the whole concept of him, how he'd obviously spent so much time out on the planet because he was sent there for a war, because he was fighting. I don't know was he fighting a war against Tim Shaw? That was one thing I didn't quite get out of the episode. Was it Tim Shaw?
I'm not sure if it's ever stated. Maybe, I don't know.
But Panitrax, Paltraki even, that was his name.
Paltraki, yeah, that was it, yeah.
And I like how when they first meet him, he obviously doesn't know who he is, and then the doctor gives him the neural stabilizer, and he slowly starts to remember who he is. And we find out the whole thing about my favorite plot thread in this whole thing was the planets, how they've taken planets out of their orbit and then put them into these like crystal
Yeah,
shell things.
yeah, that was cool.
And the fact the doctor didn't, when you think about it, the doctor was threatening to like kill who knows how many people because she'd attached grenades to the
Yeah,
crystal.
yeah,
Like she does kind of contradict herself in this episode as well because she's like she does go in with grenades attached to the thing, and then when Tim Shaw starts mentioning about explosives, she's like, "Oh yeah, I think it's typical of you to go abound with explosives."
yeah,
Like, but her whole interactions with Tim Shaw, she just walks up to him casually, like, "So how are you doing that days?"
yeah,
I like that's one thing I do like about her doctor. She's very approachable as the doctor, whereas Peter Capaldi came across as very closed off, very disconnected. She wants to get involved with people. She wants to know and find out about people, and that's one thing I do like about her. And especially in this episode with the Ux, she understands that there's obviously they're this primitive race, but they are so powerful that they can shape reality. So they've been so disconnected from society, and I like how she makes them aware of that by the end of the episode, and how Delph, I think his name was, male Ux, like he comes to the realization, like, hang on, I want to know what's out there. Come, and they end up deciding to move planets. I thought that was a nice like conclusion to their mini arc they had in the episode of not knowing like who then worshipping a false god, then wanting to find out what the universe is actually about.
yeah. Like that. I mentioned this like I think earlier on, but the very last moment I think is one of Jodie's best because it's the moment she's about to walk into the TARDIS and she's like, there's so much out there. The universe is full of surprises, and it might surprise you. That was like a great moment. I really love that moment. And also, once again, Graham gets to say the Tarantino thing. Brilliant. I was kind of waiting for that because I knew there was like a leak to do with that, and I was wondering, oh, is there going to be something here? And there was, and I thought that was great.
Um,
Go on.
One thing I do throughout this whole series, I didn't forgot to mention it in Kablam, but they've made subtle references throughout this entire series to concept that have gone through. So in this episode, she turns around to Yaz and says, "I once dragged your planet backward with using the TARDIS," and that was a reference to the series 4 finale. And then in Kablam, she says, "I once met Agatha Christie with a giant wasp," and that's another reference to the series 4 episode. Obviously we have the Fez and Presco, where he was from. That storm cage was actually where the Doctor's wife was being held for the longest time for in series 5 and 6. So that I do like how Chris Chibnall said in interviews that there's not going to be people that like in the episode you're not going to see things that had happened, but that he likes to put subtle references, and I do like that in his writing, how he makes subtle references to the past, almost like respecting what's come before it.
Yeah, that was cool. So as a sort of overall conclusion to the series, how do you feel this wrapped it up?
I think it wrapped up character threads really well, but it didn't wrap up the series as a whole as much as I wanted it to because there wasn't anything to wrap up. Because, like you said
Yeah,
earlier, the series was individually episodes, so there was no arc that they could wrap up. So all that they could do in this episode was wrap up any character arcs that they'd gone through. So it kind of felt lacking as a finale wrapping up anything, but wrapping up character arcs, I think it did brilliantly.
yeah, I do agree with that because that's one thing I will say about Chibnall. He's very good at writing characters and character moments, and given the fact that everything was wrapped up in terms of the characters was really good. I mean, there wasn't really for Yaz, but Yaz had nothing to wrap up, and then yeah, the story, like we mentioned earlier, there's not an overarching story. There is kind of with Tim Shaw and the villain, but it just kind of it's at the beginning and the end, and then it finishes. So it's just kind of it's very disjointed. But I think as a conclusion, this works very well. And again, like I say, as time's gone on, this episode has kind of increased in terms of my opinion on it. So yeah, I thought this was a good episode. I'd probably give it an 8.
Yeah, I can agree with an 8 there.
Yeah, I think 8's good for this, and it was a decent conclusion. Yeah. So there we go. That's the entire of series 11. Now, there's still one more episode technically in this series, being the New Year's special for 2018 or technically 2019. So the episode is called Resolution. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, Resolution. Now the trailer is teasing something big. The trailer is teasing a massive, dangerous threat. It's obviously the Daleks. So I'm guessing you're incredibly excited about this.
I can't wait. If it is the Daleks, I can't wait. See all of these new casts interact with something that's been in the show since the first episode. I'm like, the trailer sets it up perfectly, and I think this is the best trailer we've had for our entire series. It doesn't give away too much, and it tells you a lot at the same time. That's what I look for in the trailer. I can't wait for this episode, honestly.
Yeah, if it's the Daleks, I think that's going to be incredibly cool. Because I remember you told me this thing before where, you had this theory where perhaps at the end of this episode we were going to hear we were just going to get a flash forward and we were going to hear exterminate or something like that. It would have been amazing if they would have done that, but we could still get a moment like that in this episode. And it's clearly going to be a returning monster of some kind, because they wouldn't hide it this much if they were gonna do that. If they wouldn't keep it this big of a mystery. So, I think the Daleks has definitely been an obvious one. Some of the biggest Doctor Who villains ever. Even before I watched Doctor Who, even before I was really aware of it, I knew of the Daleks. They're very iconic at this point, and I feel like bringing them in at this point is the perfect time. We've had a whole series of new villains. I think it's time to get some returning ones, and I feel like the Daleks is the best first choice. So, this is very exciting. I think it's going to be a great episode. I have to agree. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and obviously, I feel what I want to happen at the start. Well, not at some point in the episode. I just want it to not. You don't see anything. Jodie's doctor can't see anything, and you just see the blue of the eye stalk, and then obviously the lights on the side flashing, and you just hear the voice.
Yeah.
And I want to see her reaction to that, because Christopher Eccleston's reaction to that, he was petrified, obviously, because his doctor had just come out of the Time War. And then David Tennant was cocky around them. David Tennant and Smith was really cocky around them. And then Peter Capaldi kind of treated them with respect, but was also cocky. So I want to see what this doctor does around them. See if she reacts any differently. I'm really excited to see that.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a fun one, and definitely a big one for this series, and might tease some stuff we could get for Series 12. So that brings us to the end of the very first episode of Just What the Doctor Ordered. This was really fun. I think this is going to be, a really good series. Like I say, I don't know when the next one's going to be, honestly. I'm speaking up front. Just because we might have different ideas. We'll probably do one actually for the New Year special. That'll be kind of the next one. And then we may do some stuff for Series 12. Maybe if we get some news or things like that, we might kind of throw that in. But yeah, so we want to thank you guys for listening to this very first episode. It's actually a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. So we hope you guys do enjoy it. If you know any other big Doctor Who fans who you think may enjoy this kind of content, make sure you share it around, and make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell on either of our channels so you don't miss when the next episode releases. And as always, I've been Dec.
I'm Bri.
And we hope to see you guys again in the next episode.